I spent $9,000 on flights, dinners, and a hotel block so my family could attend my book launch. No one came. Instead, my brother posted, "Good luck with your little hobby." My aunt texted, "Let us know when you're published for real." So I got angry and later canceled the rent. Subsidy I'd been quietly sending for 3 years. Their landlord called me the next morning. I said not my lease anymore. A week later, my name is Nora Bennett. I used to think the family stories people posted online were exaggerated. The inheritance thefts, the parents who treated one child like a bank account, the relatives who could turn every milestone into a punishment. I thought nobody actually lived like that. Then my family proved me wrong. For most of my adult life, I wrote in silence. Nights after work, weekends, vacations that weren't vacations. I never asked for applause. I only wanted to finish something that mattered enough to put my name on. When a small publisher finally accepted my debut and approved a real launch in Manhattan, I let myself believe my family might be proud. I booked the venue, hired a photographer, arranged catering, bought flights from Ohio, reserved hotel rooms, and made dinner reservations. $9,000 in all. My mother, Danielle, and Aunt Linda had everything covered. I even made little name cards for the front row because I wanted to look out during my speech and see the people who had known me before any reader ever did. My boyfriend James watched me fuss over those cards and smiled. "They'd better understand how much this means to you," he said. I told him they would. The day before the event, I texted all 3 of them to confirm arrival times. Nothing. I told myself their flights were delayed. The morning of the launch, still nothing. James warned me not to spiral. He said they might be planning some dramatic last-minute entrance. For hours, I kept looking toward the doors whenever they opened. We delayed the start once, then again. Finally, the publisher gave me that careful look people use when they're trying not to embarrass you. I walked on stage while 3 front-row chairs sat empty beneath my family's names. After the reading, I went into a back room, shut the door, and checked my phone. Danielle had finally messaged me, "Good luck with your little hobby." An hour later, Linda wrote, "Let us know when you get published for real." My mother sent nothing. Not before, not after. I sat there staring at the screen until the humiliation became something colder, because there was one thing none of them knew. For 3 years, I had quietly paid 1/3 of their rent every month. Danielle couldn't keep steady work. Linda always had another medical bill. My mother kept insisting she was managing. So, I wired money directly to their landlord, Victor, without asking for praise or even telling them how often I saved them. That night, back at the 5-star hotel room I had paid for, the gift bags I'd prepared for them were still sitting untouched at the concierge desk. James was furious on my behalf, but I barely spoke. I opened my laptop and emailed Victor instead. "Starting next month, I will no longer be covering the rent for the tenants at this address. Please notify them accordingly." Victor called the next morning to make sure it wasn't a mistake. I told him, "It's no longer my rent." That was all. A week later, they were evicted. What stunned me wasn't the eviction, it was the silence. No apology, no explanation for missing the launch, no angry phone call demanding money. For several days, nothing happened. I started writing again, and almost convinced myself the whole thing had ended cleanly. Then, 10 days after the notice, someone pounded on my front door at 9:30 at night. Danielle stood there with a duffel bag. Linda dragged a suitcase with a broken wheel. My mother stood behind them with her arms crossed, looking past me into the house as if she were already choosing a chair. Danielle didn't say hello. "We need to stay here. Just a week. We've got nowhere else." Every instinct told me to close the door. James came down the hall after hearing their voices. He pulled me aside and said quietly, "1 week. We set boundaries, and then they go." I hated the idea, but I agreed. Maybe some part of me still believed proximity would force them to acknowledge what they had done. It didn't. Danielle asked for the Wi-Fi password before asking where she would sleep. Linda claimed the guest room because of her spine. My mother took the recliner and complained that I hadn't arranged proper sleeping accommodations. They ate our food, changed the television settings, ordered deliveries, criticized James's cooking, and acted like the book launch had never existed. Not once did any of them ask how it went. By the fourth day, James stopped pretending to be a host. He came home from work and disappeared into our bedroom just to avoid them. That afternoon, I found Danielle in my office wearing my hoodie and streaming basketball on my personal laptop. I told her to get out. She barely looked up. Still mad about that whole book thing? Something in me finally snapped into focus. I didn't yell. I told all three of them they had until the end of the fifth day to leave. Danielle shrugged. Linda launched into a speech about family being a lifelong bond. My mother stared at the television as if none of it involved her. On day 5, they waited until after dinner to pack. Before leaving, Linda asked if I could loan them $1,000 to get settled somewhere else. Danielle added, "It's just 1,000. You make plenty." I said no. No explanation. No apology. Just no. They walked out without thanking us, dragging the squeaking suitcase down the path. When the door finally shut, James sat on the stairs and said, "Next time, we don't let them in." I looked at the empty hallway and realized the strangest part wasn't that they had used us again. It was that after 5 days under my roof, they still had never asked a single question about my book. For a few days after Danielle, Linda, and my mother left, the house felt normal again. James started sleeping through the night. I cooked actual dinners instead of reheating whatever was easiest, and I could sit at my desk without wondering who had touched my things. Then Aunt Marie called. She lived alone in a quiet condo in Jersey, and usually stayed far away from family drama, so when her name appeared on my phone, I assumed something serious had happened. Her first words were, "Nora, they're here." I didn't have to ask who. Danielle had arrived with Linda and my mother, all carrying bags. Worse, Danielle had told Marie that I had arranged everything and that they only needed a few days off the grid. Marie sounded exhausted already. They had eaten half her groceries, taken over her television, and somehow changed all her settings. I offered to drive over and help get them out, but Marie said she could handle it. I wanted to believe her. 2 nights later, at almost midnight, my phone buzzed with a group message. Danielle wrote that Marie was being weird and they would be leaving soon, but they needed $1,000 to keep moving. Linda followed with, "We're not asking for a handout, just a loan." Then my mother reacted to both messages with a heart emoji. She didn't type a single word. 5 minutes later, a payment request appeared from Danielle for exactly $1,000 with the description, "Family help temporary." I rejected it and put my phone face down. The next morning, James was standing by the front window when I came downstairs. "You need to see this," he said. Under my windshield wiper was a folded takeout menu from a diner several blocks away. On the back, written in thick blue marker, were the words, "We're still your family. Stop acting like a stranger. This isn't how we were raised." I checked the security footage. At 2:14 a.m., a hooded figure walked up our driveway, slipped the note under the wiper, and left. The face was hidden, but I recognized the posture, the careless little pause before turning away. Danielle. Marie texted later that they had disappeared from her condo without warning. Half a package of steaks was missing from the freezer, and one of her cats had been hiding outside since they left. That afternoon, Victor called me. Danielle had contacted him, asking whether I had restarted the rent payments because they wanted to move back into their old place. Victor wanted to confirm before responding. "I haven't spoken to them," I said. "Whatever they told you isn't coming from me." He understood immediately. Saturday morning brought another camera alert. At 6:17, Danielle stood on our front porch for almost 25 minutes without knocking. Hood up, hands in her jacket, pacing slowly. She never looked directly at the camera. James watched the footage beside me and finally said, "We're getting out of this house today." We spent several hours at a farmer's market, bought bread we didn't need, talked about taking a trip, and pretended our lives were boring again. When we came home, the back gate was slightly open. I always locked it. Inside, nothing looked disturbed until I noticed the hallway cabinet. One drawer was open. Tax documents had been shifted around, envelopes torn apart, and a folder marked mortgage was missing. James checked the rooms while I searched the closets. One of his jackets was gone. So was the old winter coat I barely wore anymore. Then I remembered the birdhouse beside the house. Years earlier, we had hidden a spare key underneath it inside a plastic canister. I went outside, lifted the birdhouse, and found nothing. The key was gone. We called the police. They found no forced entry. I explained the history, the messages, and the security footage, but without an indoor camera showing Danielle actually entering, they couldn't prove who had been inside. One officer told me to document everything and call immediately if anyone returned. James looked at me after they left and said, "I was the one who convinced you to let them stay. Now we're locking doors inside our own house." His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was finished. That night, I sent an email to nearly every relative who had ever asked me for money, a favor, a ride, or a place to sleep. I told them everything. 3 years of rent payments, the $9,000 book launch, my family refusing to attend, the eviction, the unannounced move into our house, the midnight visits, and now the break-in. I told them Danielle, Linda, and my mother were no longer welcome in my home and that I would not fund them again. Most relatives said nothing. One cousin sent me a thumbs up. 2 days later, we changed every lock. James contacted a lawyer through his workplace, and we began preparing a formal no-contact notice. Then, an envelope arrived, with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note containing 6 words. "You made this a war. Fine." I knew Danielle's handwriting immediately. James read it once and wanted to shred it. I stopped him. I put it into a plastic sleeve and stored it with screenshots, camera footage, payment requests, and copies of every message. Something had changed in me. I wasn't trying to understand Danielle anymore. I was collecting evidence. The next attack came through my job. HR called me into a meeting after someone submitted an anonymous complaint, claiming I used company hours and resources to promote my writing. The report included screenshots of my author website, dates I had been away from work, and links to writing groups I belonged to. None of it proved anything, because none of it was true. I had never written my books on company time, or even logged into my author email from my work laptop. My manager believed me, but company policy still required a compliance interview and documentation. When I asked where the complaint came from, HR said it had been submitted through an encrypted online form. I couldn't prove Danielle had sent it, but I knew who benefited from frightening me. 2 days later, James received a voicemail from my mother. She said she had been praying that we could all forgive each other. She called everything a misunderstanding and said I had acted out of anger. Then she reminded him that Danielle and Linda were struggling and that blood should mean something. She never mentioned the book launch, the break-in, or the threats. That night, our trash bin was overturned across the driveway. The camera caught the same hooded figure. This time, she stopped before leaving and looked directly into the lens. The next morning, James said the sentence I had been avoiding. "They're not going to stop unless you stop them." So I upgraded everything. Cameras at the back gate and garage, real-time cloud backups, motion alerts. Then I called an old college friend who worked in private security and told him the entire story. After listening, he said, "Nora, this isn't family drama anymore. This is a case file." He connected me with a licensed private investigator. Within 2 days, the investigator found Danielle and Linda living in a condemned duplex outside Newark. Plywood covered several windows. The building had no legal electricity, and they were apparently getting water from a neighbor's outdoor hose. Danielle had a prepaid phone registered under a false name and had been contacting old classmates, former co-workers, and distant relatives, telling them I had become rich from my book and abandoned my family for fame. The ridiculous part was that my book hadn't even sold 4 figures yet. The investigator also discovered that my mother had quietly left them. She was staying with a distant cousin in Allentown and had apparently not told Danielle where she was. Even she had finally decided to escape. I sat at my desk that night with the investigator's folder open beside the note that said, "You made this a war." For months, I had been reacting to whatever my family did next. That ended there. James sat beside me while I called the lawyer again. This time, I wasn't asking how to keep the peace. I was asking how to make the boundary legally impossible to misunderstand. The lawyer drafted 2 formal cease and desist letters, one for Danielle and one for Aunt Linda. Cold language, no emotion, no accusations we couldn't prove, just dates, screenshots, payment requests, camera footage, the handwritten threat, the break-in report, and the private investigator's findings. I included a still image of Danielle looking directly into our security camera, the timestamp highlighted underneath. James signed the documents with me as a witness. We sent both letters certified mail with return receipt required. For the first time since the book launch, I wasn't asking my family to understand me. I was telling them exactly what would happen if they crossed the line again. I also sent part of the investigator's report to Victor, their former landlord. I didn't tell him what to do. I simply gave him the address of the condemned duplex where Danielle and Linda were staying and wrote, "Thought you might want to know where they ended up." Victor called later that evening. "Appreciate it," he said. Nothing more. I understood. Whatever unfinished business existed between them was no longer mine. That distinction mattered more than I expected. That same week, James and I left town. 6 days in a cabin upstate. No family group chats, no security alerts, no calls from landlords or lawyers. The cabin barely had cell service. The fireplace smoked whenever we tried to light it. The coffee maker looked older than both of us, and the nearest restaurant closed before 8. It was perfect. We walked for hours. We read. We slept. For 6 days. Neither of us said Danielle's name. I hadn't realized how exhausted I was until nothing was demanding a response from me. When we returned, I almost expected flashing police lights outside the house or another message taped to the door. There was nothing. I checked the footage anyway. Delivery drivers. Wind moving the trees. A neighborhood cat crossing the driveway at 3 in the morning. No hooded figure. No one standing on the porch. No messages. The silence lasted nearly a week before a small white package appeared at the front door with no return address. Inside was my old hoodie, the same one Danielle had worn during those 5 miserable days in our house. It had been folded neatly and sealed inside a plastic bag. Beneath it was a scrap of paper with one word written in blue ink, "Fine." James stared at it and asked if I wanted to call the police. I shook my head. We photographed everything, sent a copy to the lawyer, and stored the package with the rest of the evidence. Then we went to dinner. That was the moment I knew something in me had shifted. 2 months earlier, a message like that would have ruined my week. Now, it barely ruined an hour. 2 months passed. Nothing from Danielle. Nothing from Linda. My mother never called again. My job moved on from the anonymous complaint. Once compliance cleared me completely. The book kept selling slowly. Not enough to make me famous, and certainly not enough to justify the fantasy Danielle had apparently been spreading about my wealth. I returned to my second manuscript. James stopped checking the windows every time a car slowed near our house. Life didn't become perfect, but it became ours again. Then, on a Thursday morning, an email arrived from a law office I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Request for mediation estate matters." My first reaction was that Danielle had found another way to drag me into something. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened the attachment and saw my full legal name beneath the letterhead. My father's older brother, Uncle Raymond, had died. I hadn't spoken to Raymond in more than 15 years. He and my father had fallen out long before my father died, and after that, Raymond simply disappeared from our lives. No Christmas cards. No birthday calls. Nothing. According to the attorney, Raymond had no spouse and no children. His will had been sitting through probate delays for nearly 2 years. The estate wasn't enormous, but it included a modest house in Vermont, a savings account, and several personal belongings. Then I reached the beneficiary section. My name was the only one there. Not Danielle. Not my mother. Not Linda. Just Nora Bennett. I called the attorney because I was certain there had been some mistake. He confirmed my identity, asked several questions, and then told me something that made me stop speaking entirely. Uncle Raymond had followed my writing for years. Quietly, he owned copies of magazine pieces I barely remembered publishing. He had bookmarked my author page. And according to the attorney, he had attended my Manhattan book launch. He was there? I asked. He mentioned it several times, the lawyer said. He sat toward the back. He didn't want to interfere. I thought about that night again. The 3 empty seats in the front row. The name cards. The humiliation of looking toward the entrance every time the door opened. All that time, while I was staring at the empty chairs reserved for people who had chosen not to come, someone from my family had actually been sitting quietly in the back. The attorney said Raymond left a handwritten note with the will. He read it to me over the phone. 2 sentences. You're the only one who ever finished something. Take this. Do something good. I cried after the call ended. Not dramatically. I just sat at my desk while tears kept falling onto my hands. James found me there and immediately thought something terrible had happened. I handed him the printed letter. He read it twice, then pulled a chair beside mine. Neither of us spoke for a while. For months, I had been trying to understand why my mother, Danielle and Linda, could watch me build something from nothing and still reduce it to a hobby. I kept thinking there must have been some version of me they could have loved correctly, if I had earned enough, paid enough, forgiven enough, or made myself useful enough. Raymond's note didn't heal that. An inheritance couldn't fix years of being treated like an emergency fund with a pulse. But for the first time, I understood that being unseen by the loudest people in my family did not mean nobody had been watching. I'm driving to Vermont next week. Just me at first. James said he'll join me after I sort through the paperwork and make sure the house is livable. I don't know whether I'll keep it, sell it, renovate it, or sit on that porch for a month doing absolutely nothing. Maybe I'll write there. Maybe I'll finish the 2nd book there. What I do know is that I'm done building my life around the possibility that Danielle might come back, or Linda might ask for money, or my mother might suddenly decide blood matters again. For the first time in a long time, the next chapter doesn't belong to them. Maybe the next update won't involve cameras, locks, lawyers, threats, or midnight footsteps. Maybe it will just be me on a porch in Vermont, coffee in my hand, James beside me, a blank page open on my laptop, and enough silence to finally hear my own life again. And if that happens, I already know the first sentence I'm going to write. Something good finally happened.